everyone. Welcome to another episode of FCBB Talks. I am Francisco Bianchi, Federation of Canadian Brazilian Business, and I'm the president of the federation. And today with us, we have Janny Ng. So let me introduce a little bit about our guest today, and then we're gonna do a fireside chat, and I'm gonna make few questions to her, and anyone from the audience, please feel free to join in and send us some questions to the through the internet. So Janie is a very senior, uh, with all due respect, Jenny, very senior executive from the procurement and supply chain and buying department here in Canada. She has an amazing experience in working through a few very large corporations here in Canada, such as Lowe's, Canadian Tire, and now she's been at Wellesley from the past few years, and she holds a MBA degree at the Wilfrid Laurier University. She's a chartered professional accountant as well, although she is like expanding her a field of work, let's say like that. And I think we're gonna have a very productive talk today. So welcome, Jenny, and thank you for your time for being here with us today.
Thank you, Francisco, for having me, and thank you, FCBB, for having me.
Uh, you're welcome, Jenny. So, just as a start, just to have a nice break here. So, how did you first start about find out about procurement, and buying department? Because it's not like something that we are in, in college or university. You think like, oh, okay. So, how would it be, I'm going to work on procurement and things like that. So, how did you find out about it?
For sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I started my career, my business, as you can see, my degree was in business. I moved into logistics and distribution. If you actually, my career started actually at Loblaws. So that's actually one retailer you missed there. But it was a
I'm
lot about
sorry.
operations and understanding all of the intricacies that really made sense at the time. So that's would say early 2000s. And from then onwards, I built a career about 10 years in supply chain operations with logistics, distribution, transportation. I also spent some time at Canadian Pacific Railway, and eventually landing at category management. Essentially, category management, procurement, if you will, is basically the decision point. And if you think about supply chain, is really the execution of all those decisions. So what I wanted to do for my career was to be in the decision, in the chair that was actually driving and leading the strategies for the organizations like retailers like Canadian Tire, Walmart, Home Depot, to be driving the strategy and the brands that actually they carry.
That That's amazing. That's very good. Just as a little bit, if you could just deep dive or just explain a little bit more what is a category management like in a broad view. You don't have to deep dive on that. Just like so people can relate to, you know, where you are on all of this and why we're gonna talk about procurement and supplying to large companies. What is related to the conversation that we have today.
For sure, and I want to make sure that the conversation is very relevant to the audience that is with us today. So, if you could actually put on the third page of the presentation in the procurement category management, please, if you could switch there, just to give you a visual in terms of the differences between the two disciplines.
Okay.
First, I'm assuming that you're seeing procurement really is the function. So when we talk about sourcing and procurement, is really the function and it's transactional-based discipline that is a practice of procuring products that is not for resale. So, for example, if you are in the office or anything that we consume in the office today, that's procure for us because it's bought and we use, right? For the for and that is usually there's usually a bidding processes and price usually prevails.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the in category management is really where vendors or suppliers come together to bid, or they want to have space in the shelf, in your Walmart or your Loblaws shelf. So if you're going to, as a consumer, if you're going to buy your Nespresso, if you want Nespresso, if you want Nespresso, that is a category management function. So organizations like Walmart, Home Depot engage category managers teams to do that analytics, and really the discipline is more well-rounded instead of just procurement. It creates this brand strategies, and they feature the selection of vendors. It's a long-term strategic relationship with the retailers and wholesalers, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a retailer or wholesaler. In this case, it's basically who's going to buy the product and who's going to resell. It's a brand strategy, so it has to do with, again, like I mentioned, the Espressos, the iPhones, and or the Samsung. Do you want to feature Samsung versus iPhone? What is it that your strategy is all about? And that's what category management, and that decision belongs to the category management team. They have an intentional product strategy that is passed down from senior management team, and how they're going to win the market. In this discipline, they also decide on product innovation, long-term growth. And the metrics of success here is really sales. It's not just buying for savings, it's buying for return on investment, inventory, because you have what you buy, you have to sell. And it's really a performance-based category discipline.
Oh, that's so thorough. Thank you so much. That's very helpful, and I think I mean, not only for all of our audience, but for sure for me, it was very, very helpful, and I could, understand a little bit more about the relevance of the category management as a whole. So let's talk a little bit more about macro and opportunities and things like that. So, and another thing is, from the members and communities here at FCBB, I usually, try to say something related to that, that there's an opportunity to tap the Canadian market, and et cetera, et cetera. But do you think that in the last 20 years or so, do we have a better window or opportunity to get into the Canadian market? And if yes, then why?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's why I thought it was a great opportunity to speak in this event, because uh, it has. If we can actually switch to the next slide, please. If we actually stop and think where we were 20 years ago in terms the amount of product we sourced from Asia and China specifically, right? So what I did was pull a snapshot of where we were 20 years ago. By the way, 20 years ago, I was at Canadian Tire, and I was in the supply chain logistics team, which was actually we were actually investigating more opportunities, and what was the cost benefit analysis of buying in a bigger quantity and holding that quantity for long periods of time. And it was a lot of analytics that was put in at that time to understand, the cost benefit of holding the product versus, buying in at a lower price and hosting the product. And obviously, it proved that concept proved tremendously successful. So one thing is, you can see from the chart of the amount of products, or the GDP, that economic growth that China has experienced in the past 20 years has been unprecedented, right? No other country has grown so much, and in billions of dollars. What has done, though, is created a dependency on the Orient, which proved to it really challenged us during COVID. So during COVID, when everything shut down and containers couldn't make their way here, we had a huge shutdown. So, for example, I could say to you that organizations actually, because of the uncertainty of the economic conditions, they actually had to cut the orders by, I would say, 60 to 70%. So that left a lot of the vendors, and then the logistics really to a halt, if you will. Fast forwarded that a few months later, what happened was the cost of the containers to come over to Canada went from 4,500 a container to sometimes 45,000 a container. So that is, I think, in percentage point, I just like my calculator was in, it really like exponentially bad, 10 times more. So, so if you think about the dependency, but one thing we do have to admit is that China enabled us economically as Canadians and North Americans, enable a standard of living that we enjoyed, right? So it prevented inflation. So I don't know if you're from the era of VCRs. VCRs in the 90s were about $500. As soon as China opened up, they could be sold for $50, right? So that's the benefit of it. So all of a sudden, your money could go a lot further. So now, anyways, all of this to say is that right now we need to companies have realized that they have to create more opportunities for other countries to play in the space. We do have a direct order, and I know this for a fact that our vendor suppliers, as well as retailers and wholesalers, are actively looking for opportunities outside of China. One thing I can share with you is that during the moment of COVID, when pricing of containers went so high, was that a lot of my vendors that had original factories or production capabilities in Mexico, in Latin America, took their modes and their production capabilities and basically imported. They basically brought it over in a matter of a few weeks, and they start producing here just to prevent the price increases from surpassing to unattainable levels. So that's to say that right now, having the concept is there, it's tried and proven. What we do need to think about is how do we enable countries like Brazil and manufacturers that are willing, small to medium manufacturers that are legit and they want to play in the North American market. How do we enable them and onboard them to the North American requirements?
Okay, we're gonna get to the details, don't worry. So to make a long story short, you believe that Brazilian firms could benefit from this deleveraging concentration of a large supplier country as a whole, in Brazilian firms could benefit or tap this market, right? What initially they before going to the details on and how you worked here in Canada, etc. Is there like some industries that you think it's more likely, where the Brazilian could have a competitive advantage, or you don't have to say it all. I mean, just a few if you have. I mean, I know this is all was off a script, but the conversation was so good and so deep that just kept me thinking. How some categories that could benefit from some industries could benefit from is just that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing is that when we think about obviously whatever competitive advantage, so obviously the attendants they know also. Okay, so if today you're doing textile, right? So textile, leather is a big one because leather Brazil is a big exporter or of leather because I know I have friends in leather like shoe industries that go import just the raw material, not the finished good,
Mm-hmm.
because that actually the raw material goes from Brazil, Argentina into Asia. Companies like Vietnam, places like Vietnam, China, still producing them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if if we think about this, there's nothing stopping Brazil from exporting the actual finished good, which really demands a higher price point. A raw material is one cost, right? It's probably one portion of the cost, but if you actually you are able to ship the finished good, that it attains a higher price point, your GDP grows, and everybody's happy. But it's to get to that readiness. So leather is, fashion is a great example. Brazilian fashion is actually fashion forward in comparison to North American, and then goods like finished goods for construction. So if you think about the growth right now that we are experiencing in Ontario with 500,000 immigrants ready to enter the country, we have the most amount of cranes in the province of Ontario, actually city of Toronto, GTA area, the greater Toronto area. That is something like we never experienced that in Canada before, right? Let alone
That's true.
so it is very important for us to actually think about, like, as a, you know, a bunch of smart people, to think, what is the demand right now? I can tell you that the demand is for finished goods, right? Product that is
Okay.
finished, because I think that is something that we can definitely focus about. Construction products, like things that, like, we're talking about lumber, we're talking about chinaware, toilets. If I you know, I'm not as aware about the aluminum production in Brazil, but
Mm-hmm.
faucets, so finished goods like that. And, you know, focus less on the retail, but focus more on the end customer, where it's more for to service this 500,000 uh, 500,000 people that is about to come in, and how can we support them going forward.
Oh, great. So for just a little broader information to the audience is just like Jenny's referring that Canada is welcoming 500 new immigrants per year for the next couple of years, and after allowing or bringing over a million the last couple of years as well. So and about the cranes, I just as I heard, I there is no other uh, metro area in North America as with as much crane as we have in GTA now. So yeah, we know. So it sounds like construction season here in GTA will never end, right?
Well, the need for labor is one. It's a real one too, because as you know, I'm in wholesale now, and I see a lot of projects at standstill because there's equipment shortage, there's labor shortage, there's also you know, so all of that like prevents you from actually moving forward and progress from occurring in the cities that we live in.
Oh, okay. So I'm a Brazilian firm, targeting product goods, not services. We may talk a little bit about services if we have time, because I know your forte, it's finished goods, et cetera, et cetera. You build out your career on goods and not in services. But okay, Brazilian firms, they understand, oh, there's a huge market growth in Canada right now, not only in Toronto, but in Canada as a whole. Uh, how can I, come in, or should I open an office? How does it work? Or can I work with Wesley, or can I work with Canadian Tire? So tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, for sure. So in my past, I worked with different iterations of vendors, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I worked with a vendor that only had a computer, and then it was just basically a vendor representative in the country. And I would say we brought that just two individuals, and then the manufacturer was all in China with no distribution capabilities in Canada. It was basically for, if you're working with companies like Canadian Tire or Walmart, they basically go over there and they can create. If they have scale, they take care of all the distribution. And the
Okay.
logistics. Basically, you say you drop off your container at a certain location, they'll pick it up, and the consolidation happens by them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can have those. You can have, if your product or your assortment is one that they cannot live without, then they can take care of everything. But if you're pitching, right? If you're saying that this item is brand new, give us a chance, then you're going to have to make sure that that product arrives at their door. So
Mm-hmm.
how we don't care, I would say we, but us category managers, we don't care how it gets there. I need to know whether I'm going to be picking up or it's going to be delivered to me. I don't care
Okay.
if you live in a house or you're working off a house or a basement or a fancy office. But if we're going to do business long term, I think is something that we need to think about. So I would say at the start, it's important for you to actually create scale before you create an office, right? You have to have a
Okay.
couple of leads or purchase orders in place that can justify your investment to actually have presence in Canada. Initially, I would say a great laptop, representation, have a great product, and and get your story, get your basically selling features on point, so you can get that meeting, so then you can get that relationship building. I've had relationships with vendors that I never bought anything, but you're always working towards something because for example, we have own brand, and I don't know, Francisco, if you know own brand. So you may have, for example, I'm going to go back to the Nespresso example. Okay, you have
Okay.
Nespresso, and then you can always also have Francisco's coffee.
Okay.
So if Nespresso is very interested in your coffee and they want to put their label on it, they will come to you, right? They will come to you, and then you have a better grain, and your grain lasts longer. And once you drink your grain, you have features that they cannot live without. So then, but assuming Nespresso is a retailer also, okay?
Okay.
Here,
Okay.
so because it's own brand, meaning that the retailer has to own that brand. And it
Mm-hmm.
usually happens like brands like that is like a PC, no name, things that you're
Okay.
used to. So
Mm-hmm.
going back to the examples, Nespresso goes to your factory and say, you know what? I love your product, but you are not at the capacity that we're looking for. You have to
Okay.
build your capacity. Maybe in 2 years we'll talk. Maybe in 5 years we'll talk. And when you get to that capacity, you knock on their door again. So the relationship can continue growing even if they haven't bought one single thing from you, and you can still working towards getting that piece. So to answer your question, do you need an office? No, but you need to have a product or something to sell them that they cannot live without, and you can expand on that relationship for you to actually settle. You do have to have a business, what do you call it, a business registration. Make sure your business is registered to operate in Canada, because your representatives will need that, right? Because you're basically knocking door to door, essentially, a retailer to
Mm-hmm.
retailer. And that's what we do as category managers. We actually follow every single lead, because this is how product innovation comes through,
Oh,
and by really chasing the opportunities that come after us.
okay. Okay. I see. Perfect. No, that's great. But I think Nespresso should pursue George Clooney instead of me. But anyway, so what I think you touched a very good point is that you said, okay, so you either have an office here or if you don't, but however, building a long-term relationship with Canadian buyers, it's very compelling, very important. Uh, is this like mm, because it's also part of the conservative culture that the Canadians are compared to Americans and other culture as well, not very, jumping things like that, do you think, or is just like the way of doing business in Canada?
No, it is more because you see what happens is this. So a company like Walmart, Home Depot, Canadian Tire, they can extract a lot of resources from your manufacturer, right? Like I would say, you can make someone rich overnight, and then you can also bankrupt them. You want to make sure
Mm,
the vendors have stability, right? And like your Francisco manufacturer has stability to make sure that your day in day out, that demand, because you could have a purchase order for, I don't know, $500,000. Maybe your production capacity is only 250. And what do
okay.
you, you're going to have to add more production capabilities. You're going to have to buy more product, and that might be just a one hit wonder. And then what happens next? What happens to the extra machinery you do? So it is, and that's why it's a discipline of category management. We need to make sure we vet the vendors, so then you're not causing them more harm than good.
Okay, I see. I see. That's yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things that, it drove my attention here. And I remember when I was at when I was working in a fashion corporation, We had a rule that we could not represent more than 20% of the annual buyers buyings from a specific supplier. And probably it was because of that, right? We don't want to create a huge dependence on them on us. So if we postpone, we cancel an order, change the market, things like that, we could bankrupt this supplier, or it could jeopardize its entire operation, right? So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And going that further, but before that, we please, if you're watching from the internet, that uh, please post your questions. That we have already a question here. We're gonna so we're gonna hold this question just because of the flow of the next topic is related to the previous one. But we're gonna put all the questions in the end, and we did plan some time for it. Okay, so please keep posting the questions. We're receiving some questions coming up already, and but getting back here, Jenny. So you mentioned like purchase orders, like being able to. What are the minimum requirements, thresholds, to become like a, let's say, like a certified supplier to a Canadian company?
For sure. Let's go to the next slide, which is supplier must-haves. Because I put this together over the past few years, we've had first meetings with new suppliers, right? Sometimes they come in and they don't even know the do's and don'ts. And it's funny because I find that this is actually my go-to page when I actually onboard new vendors. I would say this: suppliers must-haves are the following. The company has to be solid, again, before the product even. You have to have a current set of customers. Who are your customers? You need to actually, I love when a vendor comes in to pitch a product, they talk about themselves first, because I need to know who I'm going into relationship with. Product relationship is only a 2 to 5 year horizon because of the product life cycle, right? But the
Hmm.
relationship is for a long time. And that's why we engage with the strategic vendors. So who are your customers? I need to know. If it's my competitor is buying from you, I definitely want to hear from you. However, if you're only selling to a small, only to your local market, um, it's fine too. I have developed vendors that would sell only to their local markets, and I've actually brought them from like a Cinderella story, if you will. I have vendors that still thank me because I built their business from 2.5 to 25 million, right? Only
Oh,
because you curate an assortment and you price them correctly, so then you hit the market price points. There's other things, because you understand their capabilities. I go to the factory and I say, okay, so you have this, it's underutilized. So if I give you this product, it makes sense. So you can work together, because a lot of times it's a jewel. It's a jewelry trying to be in the rough, if you think about it. If it's diamond in the rough, they say, right? Because a lot of these suppliers, they are good at what they do, but they don't know how to bring it to market or use these resources differently.
okay.
There's also things like know the size of, like, I'm interested to know about your company, the number of employees, what's your dollar sales, like, have you sold $1 million, have you sold 500, what is it that am I going to have to invest something for you to actually build your like your investment, what is it going to be, what is your production capacity. Like I said, I want to know if 60% of the time you are not producing. I'm going to give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be a garden hose, for my first year Canadian Tire. I used to be garden hoses, so hoses that you use on the lawn and stuff. One of the things is that the price was so high because they could not, they were allocating. So I kept pushing them on pricing, pricing, pricing. And I said, listen, if you use your production capacity for other things, like, I don't know, what do you call this? Wires, because hoses also, wires are similar, right? Because it's the same
Mm-hmm.
tubing. And they started going down the path, and they figured that they could have efficiencies by when they were not producing hoses, they could produce wires because it's the
Okay.
same type of manufacturing.
Okay. Assembly line. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Correct. So what happens is that it uncovers and unlocks new opportunities for the vendor to enter new markets, and it helps my pricing, because now they are utilizing their company to the fullest. And I introduced them to the category manager of
Of
pipes,
wire or
right,
pipes.
and wipes, and it's a sweet deal. So that vendor now, it's divested, like it doesn't have all eggs in one basket. It does, because if you have a rainy season, no one's going to buy hoses, right? But wires you still can sell, or pipes or whatever, right? So
That's true.
it is something like that. So there's a lot of things that we can uncover. What is your production capacity? We talked about what is your long-term strategy and alignment. How does it align to mine? Because I don't
Hmm.
want to be like, it's not a one day, it's a marriage. I usually say it's not a first date, it's a long-term marriage. And things that really change the perception of category managers is systems. Like, do you use SVP? Um, do you use what are other like warehouse managing systems or production management
Mhm.
system? Do you have a forecasting system? What are your distribution capabilities? Do you ship directly to the customer, or does the customer pick up, or do you not deal with it at all?
Outsource. Hmm.
Exactly. So there's a lot of those things at play. And then the next thing I'm interested in is the product, right? First, it's not always the shining and new, but the product is the reason why we are here to talk about, like, together. What
Hmm.
are you selling me? I want to know the features and benefits. Why should I get this? Why you and not someone else? Why this? um, Quality certification for North American market, at the minimum the CSA or the
Hmm.
ULC. Packaging requirements. So one thing is that it is extremely, in Canada, you cannot run away from the bilingual English and French. And then if you expect to get into the US, you have the Spanish as well. So whenever we buy products from vendors that sell to both, sometimes the packaging comes in three languages. You can notice that in some of the products,
Yeah.
and we get fined, and we pass the fine to the vendors. By the way, when products get audited and they don't follow the language requirements, and then often we talked
Oh.
about as warnings, manuals, everything has to be in the right language. And we can even talk a little bit more about the risks, and obviously the price, right? Because all of this, we have to talk about the price, and then what is your price? And price, is it with shipping and handling, and no shipping and handling? All of that is in place. And also with price is also where we talked about, if you're taking shipping and handling, it does include the customs clearance and all the great stuff that comes along with it, that is required within the logistics space.
Mm, I see. Wow, there are a lot of requirements, right? So, my next question is like, okay, and you touched a little bit on that already, but you said, a product or, the supplier of that product could be fined by auditor and things like that. So, what are the risks and challenges that a supplier has to consider when coming to, to sell to Canadian domestic market or North American market, as you know?
Yeah, the thing is, it's interesting because it's like I joined. So talk about the risks. Um, I joined. I left Canadian Tire, came to Wolseley, and Canadian Tire is a well-oiled machine. Okay, so all of the departments are there. You can hand off a plan and say, I found this new vendor, and they would do everything. They would do the audits. They would do all of the checks and balances, and then 60 days later I get my product. It's a beautiful thing. Here at Wolseley, and here at Wolseley, it's not like that, right? So it's interesting because a lot of the checks and balances are not there. So we're going through this very difficult task of getting all of our vendors onboarded. And it's interesting because what I put together in our next slide is some of the items that I would like us to consider, because it talks about the risks, how bigger companies have taken on or highlighted the risks to the small manufacturer. So what happens is that when a small manufacturer comes to me and says, "Oh, I want to supply to you," then I'm going to hand them a piece of paper and say, "Please sign here, because these are the things I need you to consider." And I could tell you 9 times out of 10, they will go the other way. they will walk out instead, and they let me talking by myself, because
Oh my gosh.
the list of items that we need you to consider is extensive. Um, First, vendors are required to sign a commercial supply agreement or master supply agreement. It can people can call it differently, different companies, but it's essentially this reason. It's like you have the right to supply my product, right? In
Mm-hmm.
this agreement, it is basically a contract. It's the vendor contract, and it
Mm-hmm.
has rebates information. So, yes, I'm gonna sell it to you, Canadian Tire, Walmart, but I'm also giving you a 10%, 15%, whatever rebates, which is back end terms they call it. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm selling you for $100, I'm gonna get $85 at the end of the month, because the $15 they are gonna put it in a slush fund to use it for marketing, to use it for inventory transfers, for whatever it is. So a lot of the big companies, please consider that, because it's not the price you state. It's they will always ask for rebates. So when you quote your product to somebody, think about them. Ask for your rebates. What's your rebate structure? A lot of people don't, and then they get surprised. Uh, Certificate of insurance, and I'm in the building industry, construction, and it has to be at least $2 million. If you can appreciate, is that if I buy a faucet or toilet, right, as a construction company, and I install it, and then there's a leak because of the lack of quality on your product, you, Mr. Vendor, take on that responsibility. There's a court procedure and everything else, and but you are sued for that amount.
Oh my gosh. For so it's not like I as following your example, right? I bought a hose from a Canadian Tire, and the hose malfunctioning and damaged my pipes, and then the water started leaking all over my place. And I live in, and there are neighbors or apartments down, and on lower stories, etc., etc. So I'm not gonna, it's not Canadian Tire, following this example, that it's gonna be liable
It is the
to,
vendor,
it's the vendor, so it's the
correct?
supplier. Oh
It's a
my
supplier.
gosh.
So it's a manufacturer, to be
It's a
honest. It's a
manufacturer,
manufacturer,
okay.
because manufacturer has the duty to test to make sure that it's a product that meets the standards, and the CSA would be in question too. And there's an investigation, and usually there is. In a hose example, okay, a hose which
Mm-hmm.
is for the garden, it's a smaller thing because it usually impacts you, right? And maybe you have
Mm-hmm.
water damage on your wall. It might be maximum of a few $1,000s, but it could be millions if it's in a building. You think about a 25 or 40-story building. If it leaks to the bottom neighbor, to the bottom neighbor, to the bottom neighbor, so it is significant. So think about that. So that we talk about construction products, but construction products have a even higher liability, right? So if you think about that, I've in my experience as a Canadian Tire category manager, I've had so I used to source gardening products like water hoses. I used to source shovels, if you know shovels for earth, right? And it's all very exciting products. Leaf blowers, chainsaws. So I used to get a lot of customer um, complaints, not complaints, but situations where they're coming after Canadian Tire for damage. They get hurt. Something overheats and it hurts them, or it causes them injuries, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're not able to work. So there's a lot of that. And then we often, retailers will get indemnification letter from the vendor or supplier, and the supplier takes care of all of those investigations. Usually is a long proceeding anyways, but yeah, they happen all the time.
That's amazing. So it's like at least a $2 million insurance
in
policy.
the in the I would say average, because I'm giving you this example from a construction business, right? But
Okay, fair
you
enough.
have to we would have to go into your specific product type and industry standard. If it's like a hose, probably a lot less, because the worst that can happen is get someone wet. But if it's a chainsaw quality issue or anything like that. It could hurt somebody. People could be out of wages. And then is it cause a one-time problem? Was it a consistent problem? So that's why you have recalls. Cars is a big liability, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's essentially those are the things in place. I don't think it's any different than what it is in Brazil, but here the law is clear. The law is very clear. So that's the only thing. And it's not to cause fear, it's to cause awareness, right? Make sure that currency. So knowing the next item that I have here is about talking about currency. Do you want to transact in US dollars, Canadian dollars, or what is it that is going to be? So in this master buying agreement, you will also have price change notification. If you change your price, you cannot change it right away. How many days notice you have to give me? So all of those prevents the wholesaler retailer from taking on the risk. Force
Oh,
majeure, and that's a term that when you are forced to do something. For
yeah.
example, if you produce something that is resin, plastic, or anything like that, and prices go up, what happens to my price? Or you're forced to take it out of the market because all of the resin needs to go into, I don't know, the production of robots. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Government is doing it. So a force that is greater than yours, and then who's, that defines that as well. Payment terms. Do I pay you every month, every day? Once I get the product, I have 60 days to pay, whatever that is. Also, certificate of origin customs, that's standard. And then identification is a big one. So be
Mm-hmm.
prepared to let me know that I have nothing to do with it. It's all on you. And when you are going to court, it's your name, Francisco Bianchi. I have nothing to do with the coffee that you produced. Also, defective goods, right? If a product's defective, what happens? Uh, you know, are you gonna pay me to take on defective goods? Are we gonna destroy your field? What happens there, right? And then also any market developing funds for me to market your product for me. So if you want market, Francisco Bianchi slashed all over my website, it costs money, right? So all of that vendor supports the growth of the organization. So every time you go to a retailer, even Costco, okay, they
Mm-hmm.
all take a chunk of the vendor's money. There's a reason why the vendor's there. There's a reason why you're buying certain products there because they have supported the vendor, the retailer with all of this.
Oh, okay. I see. So whenever they're like offering you like a bread and soup and try it on Costco, it's not like Costco is paying. For sure, the vendor is paying and
The vendor's paying.
paying the right to be there to Costco as well.
Paying the rights to Costco, enabling the Costco, making sure Costco, because it is the channel, right? Because don't forget, the vendor doesn't, it costs money to put all the bricks and mortar, all the websites, handle the customer, the complaints, and all this stuff. The vendor just produces the product and ships. So all of that, so you have in your price, it needs to encompass all that. So that's something that I often warn my vendors. I say, it with the being a vendor comes with great responsibility, and all of that needs to be considered. So all of those risks are in place because don't forget, the retailer wholesaler is just a middleman.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay. So before opening the floor for questions, my final question is like, uh, what are I mean, what are the benefits of getting into the Canadian market if you want to like expand to US or things like that? But before you jump in, and start answering with all your knowledge from your specifics, just it's important that uh, from the Brazilian firms, it's important to point out that Brazil and Canada have tax agreement. So whatever federal tax that you pay in Brazil, and you're exporting or doing business here in Canada, you're not going to pay twice tax here in Canada and the other way around. However, Brazil does not have such tax agreement with US. So like like an entry door to North American market, like new NAFTA and things like that. So Canadian, not only for the reasons you're going to talk about it now, but also from, tax planning and tax wise, it's also very interest for Brazilian firms. So please, Jenny, all in terms of, the production and operation on a market opportunities, what do you see when, as a Canadian, starting by Canadian domestic markets, and how possible, how feasible it is to explore the NAFTA markets somehow, if please.
I think so. I think this is it's so interesting because you're going into the technical part from where we have enabled, right? Because like I said, over the past my career at Canadian Tire, we enable a lot of small to mid-sized vendors from Orient in Canada, and they've taken off. There are other ways to enter the U.S. market, and I will give you an example. For example, I sourced hand tools like cutting tools, like things like snippers or anything like that. That when you cut your plants, the
Okay.
scissors and things like that. So I sourced
Twizzlers. Hmm.
directly. Yeah, I sourced directly from the vendor in China. So that vendor created knowledge and capabilities by supplying Canadians here, so they know our quality standards and everything they need to know, language and all the things they know, the warning labels. They learn a lot of things, right? And the scale is small because Canadian
Hmm.
population is smaller. So you it's almost like a playground for you to a test ground. You can learn, make mistakes. If you make someone mad, it's not a big deal, right? Canadians are usually nice. We don't post anything bad. Uh, and then what happens that then what I've noticed that vendor became he pitched to a brand name company in the US. So the company in the US now goes out to them, and now because they have the knowledge and know-how, and I would say 60% of the issues have been resolved by a Canadian retailer, right? Like we
Okay.
work with through, because we found the value. Like maybe I bought it for 35 cents. Now this brand, now because they are more sophisticated, they can charge $1.50. I'm just saying that,
Okay.
right? I'm just
Yeah,
giving an
yeah.
example. But I used to get really good deals, but now they are more sophisticated and they can charge more and they can go and represent a brand. So that is how you can do it. And then and when you're representing a bigger brand, you can leverage the brand, um, establish resources, right? That's a great way to kind of bypass what you said there, Francisco. But it's testing the product, your processes, requirements through Canada, and then saying that, and then it's definitely a lot of American companies know of Canadian Tire. It's just more than you know, only because Canadian Tire was the single source, in terms of imported. Like they have their own logistics company, they have their own trailers, containers, and so on and so forth. Um, and it's interesting, and there's a lot of respect. Once you've broken into Canadian market, it's a lot easier to get to US. I would say even into Europe. However, it's a further travel, right? It's further to go to Europe. But Canadian requirements are usually more strict as well. So that's
Hmm.
another thing to point out. But in general, we do have other challenges like geography, in terms of how dispersed we are. Not every market performs the same. So there are uniqueness in our country, but nevertheless, I would say a few of my vendors have succeeded and benefit by leveraging the Canadian marketplace before launching into the US.
That's amazing. That's very nice. And just a final questions related to that, like a sub question that just raised to me before we open the floor for a question from the internet, is just that, uh, i- for instance, a small vendor, a small supplier, they use they usually uh, ship to you just to one place, and you handle the logistics in entire Canada, or do they have to, you know, to put their merchandise all over Canada, which is, as I said, very dispersed and all over. Uh, Tiny population compared to California, it's smaller, but it's like 20 times larger than California for sure.
Yeah, usually for like for the companies I work for, we are responsible for the distribution of the product within the country. You
Within Canada.
within the
Okay.
country. Usually, you supply to a FOB point, which is the free, I think it's free of charge or something like that. Where that's
Free
where
on
you're
board.
free on board. Yeah, the FOB point, and
Hmm.
then there's a pickup there. So it's whether it could be my distribution center, it could be a port,
Hmm.
and that's where basically the change of goods could happen. So
That's perfect. Thank you, Jane. We have a few questions from internet. So there are a couple of them like kind of placed together. So the first question comes from Mayara Borges. So she's asking you, I know you're from product, the question is from services, but I think it's fair to our audience, just putting here. So she's asking, how do you see large immigration and business influx uh, driving demand for language services? Okay, and you can say by yourself because you speak several languages, I guess. But and following up on her question, I'm going to bundle that together. So who is more likely often the buyer of a language services, the Brazilian vendor or the Canadian buyer?
great question. So definitely language services, because don't forget that immigrant is going to need to get settled, right? So there's going to be a lot of translation services. And it's funny because I have a relative from Brazil that is here, and he's Chinese. So he said in
Hmm.
Curitiba, the Chinese population has grown to such basically, is boomed, right? So
Yep.
he's never been as busy before with his restaurant because it's culturally comfortable to go back to the culture, right? So food, and definitely services. So think about that as well. Like your hairdressers, your thing that can speak your language is very important. So starting up businesses within your community and marketing to that community is, I would say, a huge opportunity if you think about that, because they want to work with people. You want to work with people within that space. So that's the language service, absolutely. The next piece is that who would buy the language services? If I'm a buyer, I'm a procurement category manager going to Brazil, I would need someone to handle me. We call us category manager handlers, which is if you are then I would outsource somebody in Brazil to take me around to different factories and you are responsible for booking my stays, making sure that there's accommodation. I'm safe. I'm fed. That's how I used to travel China, right?
Lodged, right? Yeah, yeah.
Logistically and lodged and do the transaction, speaking to the vendor themselves, because
Okay,
I would source you because I need to trust you. It cannot be from the
definitely.
vendor, right?
Yeah. I had those kind of services from banking perspective, which is like as known as corporate access. So it's pretty much, people who help you from the banks or investment banks to do the road shows and put you there and take care of the logistics or your agenda, your eating, your staying, your eating. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. So, and the final question that we have from the internet here is, so how all those requirements play out for, and that's our final question. And sorry, but we are on the, 3 minutes to go. I don't think we're gonna have much time for more questions, guys. So it's been very interesting. But so the final question is, how do all these requirements play out for startups and micro and small business? And that's very important for us because FCBB foster startups and micro and small business as well.
I think it's great, a great question, because I think uh, if you are a startup, you could be an agency, right? You have this knowledge, you know that Janny and her team is gonna want a big presentation with your product and your thing. So I often say, here's what I need, and curate that information for me, right? And you are the link between the manufacturer and me, and be that you could create a business being a business rep. You are not the manufacturer, but you could represent them, right? You're here in Canada, you represent them. You could be the person that fill in the product information, does the price checks. Because I'm going to say, okay, so who you're competing with? Are you competing with Francisco Coffee? Are you going to compete PC Coffee? What is it? So all of that plays a role in it. So there's a huge opportunity from not just to be a manufacturer, a supplier, but you can also be an agency. You could be an advisor, a consultant for these companies, and be the middleman of the middleman, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, total sense. So, Jenny, thank you so much for your time today. I think our journey here today has been amazing, very enlightful for me, at least I could say. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me. Till next time. Bye bye.
So, bye bye. Take care.